Harry spent most of the time between his election to Parliament in 1940 and his defeat in 1949 in Ottawa, away from the family home. He returned to Toronto on the weekends. Mary was the primary parent at home.
Mother was the more loving. Father being a more typical man, he's more distant, and he showed his kindness by doing things, by taking us places. And later in life, by making us more wealthy so that we could provide for our education and give us a start. The mother was the warm one. She'd give you the cuddling and the kisses and the good stuff in life.
Father loved to tell stories. You know, he was his own, dramaturge, and he would have us pick a book from his forehead, and then he'd make up a story about it. And he did this frequently, and I remember lots of times it'd just be him and me, and I'd pick a story, and he'd tell me, or we'd walk across the farm fields.
I gather that your parents had very different beliefs about discipline.
My father used the strap and the hairbrush. And I imagine his father did too.
Corporal punishment administered by fathers to their children was considered acceptable at that time. Dr. Blotz challenged those values and behaviors. He believed that parents would do well to understand their children's misdemeanors and to help their youngsters to solve problems, to deal with their anger and frustration.
She really believed that love, forgiveness, and generosity would bring people around to her way of doing things. And it didn't always work.
What would she do when the kids got angry or when they misbehaved, as all children do?
I just remember being sent to my room, and when I calmed down, she'd talk to me about it. I mean, she'd try and understand why I misbehaved, why I had stolen an exam, or why I had, put the thermometer on the radiator and then gone to the school nurse and said I was sick. I mean, why did I do that? What was I trying to get out of? She would try and look behind the behavior.
When Dad was up in Ottawa, Mother would say, if you boys don't behave, I'll have to report you to Father. And the system then was that Mother didn't punish, but our bad deeds were told to Father. When he came home from Ottawa, we'd have to wait till after our big Sunday lunch, and then we'd go up to his bathroom where we would be spanked. First by hand and then by brush, but you had to wait all week, once you were warned, for the discipline.
That must have made for some anxious Sundays.
Made an anxious week.
My husband was developing his political interests. He had an opportunity in 1939 to win the nomination for the Rosedale riding, and I certainly spent a great deal of time with him in political activity, which came natural to me after my father's experience. In fact, I've often said, I have never been able to be myself, because I was either my father's daughter or Harry's wife.
Mary was a woman with a strong social conscience, with liberal values, who stood at the side of her conservative husband. During Harry's years as a Conservative Member of Parliament in Ottawa, he met Jean Anderson, a young woman employed by the American Embassy. At that time, she was engaged to be married.
Whatever it was between Father and Jean Anderson was painful for Mother. Was certainly someone he loved. I understood from my mother that he actually went down to Washington in the 70s every 2 weeks while she was dying of leukemia. So this relationship went on for a 30-year period with my father. This was 1944 when Father asked for a divorce. In 44, she had 4 small children under 12. And divorce laws were not as they are today, and money would have been an issue. She said, I did not want him to remarry and breed again. I wanted the money for my children. And so she put up with him.
And he told me about his sadness. He told me that, how unhappy he was with his marriage, with his children, and about the potential that he had for happiness with someone else. And his sadness was that this was a wasted opportunity.
I think he would have been happier with someone who was willing to submit to the man. Well, he would have liked someone who perhaps was just gayer, laughed more.
When Mary refused Harry's request, she knew well the sanctions against divorced women in her milieu. She would face social stigma as well as isolation in a world focused largely on couples. For almost all unhappily married women, the choices were few: poverty or economic dependence. Staying in the marriage safeguarded her children, but also gave Mary the financial base that allowed her to go on with her work.
Throughout my life, when utterly perplexed and down, I do think of Jesus' life and realize that to go on loving people and trying to understand them is all one can do, and retaliation of any kind gets one nowhere.
She may have struggled with depression because I know Dr. Ruth Franks, who was the neighborhood psychiatrist, put her on tranquilizers in the 50s. Mm-hmm. But that was common for almost all women in the 50s. So it's difficult to know whether it was anything particular or whether it was this ongoing affection of my father's. I mean, the 50s cannot have been an easy decade for my mother.
I became so very aware of how angry she had been over all the years with the revelation that Harry had other loves other than her love. And it started so early after Nancy's birth that I think for her that some of the interests that she took upon herself were ways of escaping the pain of that knowledge and the depression that she must have harbored for many years. Much of the Mary that we saw was the Mary that had to be in order to survive.